This is Joe recording a PowerPoint narration of Lesson 5 in Life Science, which deals with reproduction and heredity. This can be found on page 516 in the Kaplan book. The key ideas are that reproduction is when one organism passes its genetic information onto a new generation of organisms. This reproduction can be either asexual or sexual. Gregor Mendel in 1865 published a paper describing how this happens in pea plants. And our physical characteristics or traits are controlled by genes. Genes are little areas on the chromosomes in our nucleus of each cell. These genes can sometimes come in different forms called alleles. We inherit one allele from our mother, one allele from our father, and these alleles can interact sometimes such that one hides the presence of the other. So what type of reproduction is occurring here? You have one-celled organisms splits into two one-celled organisms. Each acquires the same DNA as the parent. This is asexual reproduction. What type of reproduction is shown here? In strawberries. Strawberries send out runners that grow under the soil, and the new plants will sprout up through the soil. Each of the plants will be the exact same each of the plants has the exact same genetic information as the parent plant. So this is asexual reproduction. Hydras are multicellular organisms that live in the oceans or sometimes in fresh water. When they reproduce, they can do it sometimes asexually by just breaking off a piece of a little bud that will then grow into a completely separate organism that has the same genetic information as the parent. So all three of these examples in bacteria, sometimes in strawberries and sometimes in hydra, are examples of asexual reproduction. In sexual reproduction, we have male and female organisms. The female organism makes female sex cells called eggs, and the male organism makes male sex cells called sperm, each of which has half the number of chromosomes as the parent. These egg and sperm cells fuse together in a process called fertilization, and that one-celled fertilized egg will then grow into the organism. Since there is genetic information coming from two different organisms, this is called sexual reproduction. The last slide showed human reproduction by sexual means. It also occurs in plants. For example, the flower is the sexual organ of many plants. The anthers shown here on the right in the flower are the pollen or sperm producing structures on the flower, and the central green structure on that flower surrounded by the anthers is the female reproductive structure in that flower. Gregor Mendel was a priest who lived in Eastern Europe. He had an interest in science and began doing experiments on pea plants. He showed that pea plants inherit traits or physical appearances from their parents in a particular way. These traits were not blended, but they acted like almost tiny particles that were being transferred, some from the mother, some from the father. He is called the father of genetics because of his study of heredity, which is the passing of traits from parent to offspring. We see this in humans in the form of hair color or skin color, in that parents pass on traits from themselves. Their children tend to look like the parents. because of the inheritance of genes, one from each parent, for many traits. Mendel studied pea plants, and it was lucky that he studied the pea plants instead of other plants, because pea plants have traits or physical appearances that are often determined by one gene. These peas have inherit one chromosome from the mother, one chromosome from the father plant, and these genes, one on the mother's chromosome, one on the father's chromosome, come in different forms. For example, for height there's a tall and a short. For seed shape there's a round and a wrinkled. Many traits or alleles show dominance and recessiveness, meaning that if the dominant trait is there, the recessive trait is not is hidden from view. This slide shows how Mendel did his experiments. He would get rid of natural processes of reproduction in the pea plants by cutting off the male structures of the flowers, and then he would take a paintbrush, take pollen from one flower and brush it on the female structure in another flower. So he was basically doing the fertilization by hand, and this is how he helped control the experiment very carefully. So Mendel showed that instead of blending of traits at least in peas, that the traits are determined by factors. One of the factors comes from the mother, one from the father. A gene is a factor that controls a trait. For example, one gene controls height, one gene controls whether a pea will be wrinkled or smooth. The alleles are the different forms of the gene. For example, for height, there is a gene or an allele that makes the plant tall and an allele that makes the plant short. He showed that if there is a tall gene and a tall gene combined, that plant will be tall. If there's a tall gene and a short gene allele combined, the plant will have a mixture of tall and short alleles, but will look tall because the allele for tallness is dominant to the allele for shortness. So if you label the tall allele capital T or big T, if the plant is big T, it will look tall. But also if it's big T, little t, because the tall allele is dominant, it will also look tall. The only time a plant will be short is when it inherits a small t and a small t, one from each parent. This slide talks about dominant and recessive alleles. And on the right, you see a diagram that is called a Punnett square. You will probably see a diagram like this on the GED, so you should be very familiar with how to sort out physical appearances based on the alleles of the mother and the alleles of the father. So a hybrid is when an organism has two different alleles. For example, it might have a tall and a short allele. That would be a hybrid. A purebred is when it has two tall alleles or two short alleles. These alleles come one from the mother, one from the father, and we usually use a capital letter to represent a dominant trait and a lowercase letter to represent a recessive trait. For example, here's a Punnett square. Punnett is P-U-N-N-E-T-T, named after the gentleman who developed this technique of predicting the appearance of offspring. On top you have a black mouse. It's black here is dominant to the white appearance. So we call the black allele capital B since it's dominant. If an animal has two capital B alleles, it will be black. If it has a capital B and a small b allele, it will also be black because the black allele is dominant. The only way a mouse will be white if it has two small b alleles. So if you mate a purebred black mouse, capital B on top, with a purebred white mouse, little b on the left, each of those parents gives one of those alleles to the offspring, so the offspring will get a capital B from the black mouse and a small b from the white mouse. So therefore they will all be hybrids of capital B and little b, but since capital B is dominant, they will all look black. Here's another example. The phenotype is the physical appearance of the organism, and the genotype is what are the alleles behind that. For example, pea pods will look smooth if they inherit a capital S allele, with S representing smooth, from either parent. So the smooth plants can be smooth either with a genotype of capital S, or with a genotype of capital S, little s, because capital S is dominant to little s. The only way a pea pod will be wrinkled if it has two recessive alleles, little s, little s. So here's another Punnett square problem. On the left at the top you see a purebred smooth pea crossed with a purebred wrinkled pea. So the smooth pea is capital S, capital S being dominant, smooth being dominant to wrinkled, and the purebred wrinkled is little s, little s. So each of these makes sex cells or gametes. The capital S has only the capital S allele to give, and the wrinkled pea plant has only little s to give to the next generation. So the next generation will be made of all capital S, little s hybrids. So they'll be mixed as far as their genotype, but they will all look smooth because capital S is dominant. When you take two of this first generation plants and breed them together or cross them, the capital S, little s can each give to the next generation either the capital S or the little s. And this is shown on the Punnett square to the right. The capital S is shown on top for the sperm, the male plant, and a little s at the top. So it can be either one of these being passed on to the next generation. Same thing for the female plant. In the eggs, they can be either capital S or little s. When you combine these by combining the rows and the columns, the upper left in the column is capital S, looking smooth. The next one on the top row to the right will be capital S, little s, which will be a hybrid as far as genotype, but the appearance will be smooth. In the lower left, you see another capital S, little s, which will look smooth, but be a hybrid in its genotype. And only 1/4 of the resulting plants will be like the one in the lower right, which is little s, because it gets a little s from the male plant, which is in the top, and a little less from the female plant, which is on the left. So 1 out of 4 of these resulting plants in this generation will be wrinkled peas, and 3 out of 4 will be smooth peas. That's it for this lesson on reproduction and heredity.